Salts are compounds made when an acid reacts with a base. Bases have an alkaline pH, and examples include metal hydroxides, metal carbonates, and metal oxides. In this pod, we shall look at the method used to make a soluble salt by reacting an acid with an insoluble base. The reactants we will use are sulfuric acid and copper-2 oxide. The salt made will be copper-2 sulfate.
The word equation for the reaction is sulfuric acid plus copper-2 oxide forms copper-2 sulfate and water. Before you start any experiment, it's important to check the hazards associated with the chemicals you'll be using. The bottles will have hazard labels on them.
Dilute sulfuric acid is an irritant. This means that you need to wear eye protection when using it, and any spills on the skin should be washed off immediately.
Copper oxide and copper sulfate are both harmful. The copper oxide is a fine black powder. Be careful not to touch it with your hands, and make sure you do not blow or sneeze into it, as this could lead to it being inhaled. Again, any spills on the skin should be washed off immediately, and any spills on your bench cleared up. The method can be divided up into 3 steps.
Step 1. Put on the eye protection and measure out 40 cubic centimetres of dilute sulfuric acid into a 100 cubic centimetre beaker. The volume does not have to be very accurate, so you can just use the measurements on the side of the beaker.
To increase the solubility of the copper sulfate so more will be dissolved in the solution, you need to heat the acid using a Bunsen burner. Do not boil the acid, just gently heat it until it is almost boiling. You can use a thermometer to judge when to stop heating. It's important not to heat the acid too much, as if it is very hot, the reaction with copper oxide will be more vigorous and create a foam that could spill over the sides of the beaker, which is a hazard.
Now turn off the Bunsen burner and add a spatula of copper oxide to the acid and stir. Use a metal spatula to transfer the oxide and a glass stirring rod to stir the mixture. The copper oxide will react with the acid and form soluble copper sulfate, which has a blue colour. You will see the solution turning pale blue as the black oxide reacts and disappears. Keep on adding the oxide, a spatula at a time, until no more reacts. This method is called adding a reactant in excess. You have added more copper oxide than is needed to react with all the acid.
All you now have in the beaker is copper sulfate dissolved in water and the excess copper oxide. All the sulfuric acid has been reacted. Adding the copper oxide in excess ensures that the copper sulfate made is pure and not contaminated with acid.
Step 2. Once the mixture is cooled, you need to remove the excess copper oxide. Because it is insoluble, filtration is used. Place a cone of filter paper into a funnel and place this into a conical flask. Make sure that you fold the filter paper correctly to ensure that no copper oxide seeps through into the flask. Also, be patient when pouring the mixture through. You should add a little at a time, making sure it does not go over the top of the filter paper. The filtrate will drip through into the conical flask. It is a transparent blue solution of copper sulfate. If there are any particles of black copper oxide, then you will need to filter it for a second time.
Step 3. The water from the copper sulfate solution is evaporated to leave crystals of pure copper sulfate. A slow method of evaporation will increase the quality of the crystals.
Pour the filtrate from the conical flask into an evaporating basin. Evaporate the solution gently using a water bath. You can create a water bath using a 250 cubic centimetre beaker containing water, placed on a tripod and gauze, and heated from below using a Bunsen burner. The evaporating basin sits on top of the beaker. Make sure that the water bath does not dry out. You might need to top it up with more water. Stop heating once crystals start to form in the basin.
To complete the evaporation process, leave the evaporating basin in a cool place for at least 24 hours. The crystals formed are pure copper sulfate and can be carefully dried in between 2 sheets of filter paper.